We should always question things. It is incredibly abnormal to consume that much sugar. You are definitely going to be invoking a distorted response from your hormones, from insulin, glucagon, cortisol, thyroid hormone. All of these things are going to become dysfunctional when you bring that much amount of sugar in at one time.
One of the things you talk about, people have a misconstrued idea of calories, you know, in terms of calories and obesity, but you break it down differently. How do you teach that?
Yeah. So because I think we should always question things, you know, and another thing, and the reason that I love and appreciate you so much is directing people to that. And in that university class, in that nutritional science class that I paid good money for, Rev, it was expensive private university. I was taught the first day that if you can control calories, then you can control your health. If you can control calories, you can control your weight. You know, it's very simple paradigm of, you know, calories in, calories out. If you want to lose weight, you expend more caloric energy than you take in. It
sounds logical.
Sounds very logical. But here's the thing. The human body is not a calculator. It's more like a very complex chemistry set, our chemistry lab. There's so much going on, and not even to bring in the mind into the equation, which we'll talk about later. Our metabolism, the human metabolism, is unique to each and every person. You have a unique metabolic fingerprint that's not like anyone else on the planet or who's ever existed before us. We have these simplifications that we love. And so in studying calories and looking into where did this dogma come from, because tens of millions of people right now in the United States alone are on calorie-restricted diets, probably way more than that, that are eventually going to fail. And a dogmatic trainer, like I used to be, strength conditioning coach, nutritionist, is going to be like, you're just not doing it right. You know?
You're taking in too many calories or something to that effect.
And, you know, so we got to find that sweet spot for you with calorie restriction, right? People post even to this day, you know, somebody's posting, they're struggling, they've tried so much, they've, you know, they've cutting their calories now. This is a grown woman. We'll just say she's 5'8", and, you know, she's 190 pounds, and she's consuming 900 calories a day at this point. And the weight is just not budging. And sure enough, some expert, you know, some nutrition expert is going to say, have you tried calorie restriction? You know, like they're just going to throw that out there. And not understanding that there are epicaloric controllers, right? So epi meaning above, caloric control, that control what calories do in your body. Just to give you an example, and this ties in together what I was eating, processed foods, heavily ultra processed foods, by the way. Right now, here in the United States, 60% of the average American's diet is made of ultra processed foods. So turning back to those Lucky Charms.
It's not even real food.
Not real food.
The body doesn't even recognize it as food.
So what happens when you do that calorie restriction with those kind of foods, because it's on your point system, right? And so this study is published in the journal Food and Nutrition Research. They want to find out what would happen with caloric expenditure when someone eats a meal of processed foods versus a meal of whole foods, all right? So this is this saying that people have now, not all calories are created equal.
Yes.
Now we have the science on this. So the whole food sandwich was multi-grain bread, whole grain bread, and cheddar cheese, all right? It's debatable how good it is, but we're not getting into that. But this was, the ingredients for that cheddar cheese is like 4 things, okay? The whole grain bread, a couple of ingredients. You could still tell that it came from some grains. Versus a meal of a processed food sandwich, which was white bread and cheese product. And if you're wondering what cheese product is, that's Kraft Singles. They can't legally call it Kraft cheese.
They have to call it Kraft cheese product.
It needs to be 51% or more cheese in the cheese. But they don't have enough cheese in the cheese, right? So they have
not enough cheese in the cheese.
They have the test subjects to consume these different sandwiches. Now, here's the most important part. The sandwiches are the same amount of calories, the same amount of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. On paper, it should have the same impact on the body. But when the test subjects consumed the processed food sandwich, they had a 50% reduction in calorie burn after eating that sandwich versus the real food sandwich. Their bodies, their metabolism, their metabolic rate slowed down. It created this hormonal clog to where their system was not processing and expending this energy. It made their cells stingy in hanging on to that processed garbage. All right? This is not accounted for when we have this calories in, calories out paradigm. And in Eat Smarter, I actually went back to the root of calories. Like, where did this concept come from that's dominated our culture that hasn't worked?
Right.
Not to say that it hasn't worked for some people, and calories have their place.
Right.
But it's not the king.
Right.
It's not the monarch. It's not the emperor
Right.
of nutrition. As we are inundated, I was indoctrinated through my expensive education to tell people that if you control these calories, you can control your
lose
health.
weight. Right.
All right.
Right.
And so it actually, the origin of it dates back to 1800s and in the realm of physics. This had nothing to do with nutrition. That was brought in a little bit later. You know, we can look at people like Atwater. We can look at Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters, who really popularized the concept of the calorie as far as nutrition is concerned. She had a nutritional bestseller in the earlier part of the 1900s, and she sold like 2 million copies, which is basically, she was like Drake.
Right.
Then, you know what I mean?
Back in the day, 2 million. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous now, but you're talking about the turn of the century.
Yes. So everybody, and in that book, she shifted the mental perception of food from being this incredible, highly complex substance, which even if you take, for example, an avocado, when you eat that avocado, you're not just eating the avocado, you're eating that avocado's microbiome.
Yes.
Right? So that's just one layer of complexity that people don't think about.
Right.
So taking it from being food to being calories. She said you will no longer eat a slice of bread. You'll eat 100 calories of bread. You'll no longer eat a slice of pie. You'll eat 350 calories of pie. It's turning food into numbers instead of this substance that literally makes up who we are.
Right. So that dominated the culture and the perception.
That's when it all happened.
Yeah.
And also in that book, this is when we began to popularize the idea of tying food to morality. Right? So your food choices determine what kind of character you have, right? If you're a bad person, you eat bad food, right? If you eat something, you cheat on your meal, you have your cheat meal.
Right.
What does that say about your character? You're a cheater.
Right.
So it starts tying these things. And also this was wartime.
Right.
So, food rationing was going on. And so she was imploring people to strive for hunger. If you diet and you feel hungry, that's when you know it's working.
Right.
Right. So another popularized idea that has no weight in science. Right. So you should look for the suffering in order to get where you want to go.
Wow.
Right. And so, these are the ideas that get pushed into culture. And the last thing I'm going to share with this with the calories. So there are many epicaloric controllers. And this can even segue into understanding the brain.
Yeah.
Your brain is the governor, really, in determining whether or not or how much calories you are assimilating from the diet, from the food that you just ate. Okay. So I'll give you an example. Researchers at Yale University, they found that the vagus nerve, connecting the brain, the gut, that this kind of super highway of information is constantly feeding back and forth data. And your brain, based on its assessment and the data that's coming from via the vagus nerve, your brain can tell your gut to decrease or increase the assimilation of calories from that meal you're eating, and decrease or increase the assimilation of key nutrients based on your brain's perception of what you have stored.
Right.
So if somebody's in a state of obesity, why on earth would their brain still be telling their gut to assimilate a great deal of those calories instead of ratcheting it down?
Right.
And this ties into work, and this was coming from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. They found that the biggest, from these scientists' perspective, hidden epidemic happening right now is something called neuroinflammation, inflammation in the brain.
Right.
And they said that neuroinflammation is really a double-edged sword for nutritional diseases. They found that inflammation happening in the brain is creating more visceral fat, more obesity and insulin resistance because of inflammation in the brain. And insulin resistance and obesity is creating inflammation in the brain. So it's a vicious circle. So one is creating the other is creating the other.
So the brain's not operating properly.
Exactly.
So it's not sending the right information for the body to do the proper thing.
Exactly.
So I want you to talk about two other things then. One, the gut and the bacteria of the gut creating that healthy, biome nature, that's an epidemic as well. Yeah.
So
and then the psychology also of the brain. What kind of nutrition should we be taking to make sure that inflammation goes down?
Yeah. So it's not just our brain, it's the brain of our microbes.
Right.
right? So the estimate that we have right now is we have 4 to 10 times more bacteria cells in and on our bodies. Right? We're teeming with bacteria.
Right.
If we go gene for gene, 99+% of the genes that we carry are not human. They're our bacteria genes. And so they also, again, they have their own goals, their own, ambitions, their own fears and things like that. Now, of course, I'm personifying the bacteria, but all of this is supposed to work together in synergy, right, for the greater good of the entity. But when things get out of balance, negative things can happen. And so, being from St. Louis, some researchers there, WashU is doing great work, as well as St. Louis University. But the greatest database of twins studies, identical twins, bared out something really interesting when it comes to our microbes and our body fat. And they found that identical twins in the same household, eating the same diet, same practices, if one twin has a microbiome that is distorted, so a definition is kind of dysbiosis, where they have more microbes that are associated with obesity and insulin resistance. So this category of firmicutes, for example, we have firmicutes and bacteroidetes. These are very broad definitions or categories of microbes. But if one twin has more firmicutes, they tended to, even though they're eating the same food, have higher rates of insulin resistance and higher rates of obesity, even though they're identical because they have different microbes. All right.
They're eating the same food and they're in the same environment.
Yes.
But they're different.
Yes. And this goes into those conversations, things that we ignore in our culture, where we have friends who could eat, you could eat the same diet as your friend.
Right.
And one of you gets thicker while the other one, stays relatively slim, eating the same diet. Right. We see this all the time. You could see, the skinny friend, right, who's eating this way, drinking whatever. They don't seem to really gain weight.
Right.
Each person has a unique metabolic fingerprint that includes that unique microbial fingerprint.
Right.
Right. So your microbes have a huge influence on your assimilation and processing of the nutrients you're taking and the calories you're taking in. So our microbiome is another epicaloric controller that I damn sure was not taught about in my university class. Again, it was very superficial. And so we need to eliminate the dogma, eliminate the victim blaming when it comes to weight loss. I've worked in this field for 20 years. Next month is my 20th anniversary in this field.
Wow.
All right. You're going to hit me with the wow like it's a long time, Rev.
Well, it is a long time based on everything you've come from.
Yeah.
And where you are today.
Yeah.
So you 20 years, that means you've done more research and more investigation and using yourself as a research project yourself. You have more than 20 years of information and knowledge because you've actually practiced what you've learned.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ferociously.
Yeah.
And, the biggest gift, again, is being able to package this up in a way that makes sense for people.
Right.
Because, we have this tendency in our culture to, again, victim blame and to put into this psychological pocket that our university education is the end all be all.
Right.
And oftentimes we don't really realize, even my nutrition program at that university is getting funded from General Mills.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's just like, what else are they going to tell you to eat in their products?
Right.
How on earth could their products be unhelpful?
Right.
And then again, even to this day, you go and look at some of the marketing on some of these cereal boxes and it's heart healthy.
Right.
Made with healthy whole grains and all these things. And it's just...
And there's a whole lot of sugar in it.
Yeah, it's insane. It's not even real food.
Right.
Not to say that you can't have your bowl of cereal, but just realize what it is.
Right.
And make that the minority of your diet, the exception, not the rule. For many people today, including myself, it was the rule.
Back in the day. Now talk to us about the psychology of, how someone looks at their food and how it's presented to them. I mean, you have a whole teaching around that I think was very important.
Absolutely. So our food choices, because this, again, we get into this place where we're treating symptoms instead of the root cause. Right. So we tell people what to do. You do this, eat that, right? Eat that, not this. Right. Instead of getting to the heart of why do we make the choices that we make? Every choice that we make is based on our perception of who we are.
Right.
The biggest driving force of the human psyche is to stay congruent with the ideas that we carry about ourselves and the world around us. We do things because that's what we do. When we do stuff that isn't connected to who we see ourselves to be, it's very uncomfortable. And we tend to withdraw from those things, right? And this is why habit change can be so difficult. And so it's looking at what is the psychology behind our food choices. And so these things really go hand in hand because our food choices deeply affect our psychology as well, right? And you know this, it's much easier to make a healthful decision when we feel good.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right?
That's across the board, anything in life. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
not to say that we can't
Right.
make a healthy decision or a powerful decision when we're not feeling well.
Right.
It's just harder.
Right.
And it's just illogical.
Right.
And so, but also, what are we making the brain itself out of? What are we making our nervous system out of? What are we making our hormones out of? Because our hormones, people hear these terms, these are essentially chemical messengers that they're kind of like little metabolic emails or DMs that are
Right.
sending messages between each cell, trying to get everybody on the same page. It's like a
Right.
group text.
Right.
Right. But if the group text is like, it's coming in too hot, there's too much and it's going to get spammed. It's going to get flagged. And now you're going to have resistance to that particular hormonal message, like insulin resistance, right? The system is being bombarded with this metabolic email and it's too much. The system has had enough. It's going to the spam folder, right? And so even with hormones, what are they made of? Our hormones are built from proteins, from amino acids.
Right.
Right. So if you're not getting in these key elements to make these things, your body simply can't make the magic happen. And this is the thing too.
It doesn't have the foundational pieces.
Yeah.
Right.
This is the thing I'm marveling about more and more in this stage of my career is how resilient the human body is.
Yes.
Because even without those things, it finds a way.
Right.
It might not be efficient. It might not be that effective, but
Right.
it keeps you ticking.
Right.
And you could see it in our society if you look around, just how resilient our bodies are
Right.
under these conditions.
Right.
Because even insulin resistance, what that is, diabetes, this condition that's, we've got right now here in the United States, about 130 million American citizens have diabetes or prediabetes right now.
Right.
That's damn near half of our population.
Right.
All right. And so what that is, when our body is creating the conditions of insulin resistance, which is just one symptom, but then you get classified, right? You get the symptom, you're classified, you're the same type 2 diabetic as everybody else.
Right. Right.
But what that is the body making an adjustment to operate differently under unideal circumstances.
Right.
Right? It's adapting.
It's adapting.
To keep you alive.
It's like arthritis.
Yeah.
Adapting to some kind of stimulation in there that creates a covering of whatever the negative issue is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because what's being talked about more and more now, and again, I'm so grateful for this because I have you in my life, the best of the best, and the same thing holds true when I'm talking about neuroscience, when I'm talking about cardiovascular surgeons.
Right.
The best of the best are my friends,
Yes.
and my colleagues,
Yes.
right. And so, knowing this and looking at when it comes to the human brain, for example, being able to actually look at the brain versus like you guessing,
Right.
right? So
Right.
because even our whole field of psychology today is really based on conversation,
Right.
right? And maybe the expression of behavior,
Right.
and then it's dubbed you have a chemical imbalance.
Right.
Have you checked their chemicals?
Right.
What chemicals are you looking at?
Right. Right. Right.
Because it's these.
Have you taken their blood?
superficial things.
Have you actually looked at a screenshot of the brain?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's what you're saying.
And so one of my really good friends, and he wrote the cover quote for Eat Smarter, Dr. Daniel Amen. He has the largest database of SPECT imaging.
Yeah.
Right. So hundreds of thousands of imagings of the brain for activity, circulation, all those things to actually see versus guessing.
Yes.
Because as he shared with me, in the field of psychology, as wonderful as it can be, oftentimes it's throwing medication-tipped darts at the brain in the dark.
Right.
Right. Trying to see what sticks, what works, what hits the target.
Right.
Versus let's look at the brain and actually see what's going on with your, with the actual structure of the brain itself. Is there some damage being done? And having clinically proven ways to help to heal the brain.
Right.
Right. And so just to circle this all back, we're talking about this psychology. When the brain itself is suffering and injured, it makes it harder to make the decisions that we want to make. Now, so that's one part of it.
Right.
So, and on the other side, and this is where it really gets cool. And as I was driving over here, I thought about this. I didn't really get it when Joe Dispenza said, "You are the placebo."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But this study that I'm going to share really now I get it. I get it.
Right.
And this was done by researchers at Stanford University. Lead researcher was Dr. Elia Crum. And this is called the milkshake study. All right. As you know, Rev, a milkshake brings all the boys to the yard.
It does what? Milkshake does what?
Never, that's from Khalees. It's a Khalees song.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
It's a Khalees song, Rev. All right. So Khalees is doing some really cool stuff too. I don't know if you've seen her recently, but she's like gardening, you know, she's on a vibe.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's called the milkshake study. And what they did was the researchers blended up a big batch of milkshakes. And they decided to put labels on the milkshakes to see how the perception of what you're drinking affects what happens biochemically to your hormones based on your perception of what you're drinking.
Right, absolutely.
So they had some of the milkshakes, they put a label on it that said 140 calorie sensible shake, right? It's a sensa shake. Right. So this is like a, you know, it's not a big deal. It's sensible, low calorie, 140 calorie sensa shake. Other milkshakes, they slapped a label on it, 620 calorie indulgent milkshakes. Right. Now here's the truth. All of the milkshakes were 380 calories. All right. They're all the same.
Right.
Equally measured, the whole thing. Here's what happened. The participants, who consumed the indulgent milkshakes, their ghrelin levels, which is associated, ghrelin is really kind of this glorified hunger hormone. All right. So it's driving us to seek food. It's driving us to seek nutrition to bring in certain nutrients, but it also has a role in fat metabolism.
Right.
People who consumed what they believed to be the indulgent milkshake, their ghrelin levels plummeted. It dropped 3 times lower than what they believed based on, you know, that particular amount of calories that they consumed.
Right.
Their ghrelin levels dropped 3 times lower than what should have happened had they consumed the actual amount of calories that was in the shake, right? So that means their satiety levels were much higher.
Based on perception.
Based on their perception, right? So again, ghrelin levels dropped 3 times lower than they should have, all right? So that's their hunger hormone, driving them to eat something. So they felt deeply satisfied. Versus the people who had the sensa shake, their ghrelin levels barely moved at all. It's negligible, all right? So what's gonna happen? They have this same amount of calories, but they're gonna be hungry sooner. Right? Because they're not satisfied because they believe this is a low-calorie, sensible milkshake. Right. Their beliefs changed their biology. Their beliefs changed their hormones. Right. Instantaneously.
This is all of Bruce Lipton's work as well, the biology of belief. I can remember a similar experiment with water, where people went into this restaurant and they had all these different kinds of water, like these really expensive bottles of water that were so pristine. And then they have these cheap bottles of water that were just okay, all the way to tap water. And people were drinking it and they had to check how the water tasted. And of course, the ones that were thinking they were drinking this really expensive water were like, oh my God, this water is so good. It just makes my mouth salivate. It was all the same water. But they were all having these different experiences based on perception. So it's not just the food you're eating, but it's your belief about the food that you're eating. And of course, you know, my whole teaching is about basically taking dominion over your attention, so that you're placing your attention at a very high level of consciousness, oneness with the presence, et cetera, so that it alters your perception, so that it changes your whole experience. So you're actually taking responsibility for your own life, which is what you did. You took responsibility for your own life. You took it away from MD, which is minor deity, and placed it back on yourself. Now, tell us a little bit about neurogenesis, because there used to be a belief that once you lost brain cells, it was over. You were never going to get those brain cells again. That was old science. What do we know today?
Yes. So we're going to talk about where neurogenesis is specifically happening. But I just want to finish off one point here because it's something you just said. You know, I've had wonderful conversations with Bruce Lipton as well. And he's had a big impact on my thinking. And I mentioned Joe Dispenza, you are the placebo. Right. Because we can use this to our advantage, this psychological insight that I just shared. If you choose to believe that your food is more nourishing, right? If the food that you're consuming is you're believing that it's nutrient rich and it's health affirming, you're going to far more likely express the chemistry, because every thought you think has correlating chemistry.
Right.
You're going to shift your chemistry to make it so. Much more likely, again, this is not a perfect science.
Yes.
But you are the placebo. You can utilize your thinking.
Right.
Because on the other side, if you're eating the most wonderful food and you feel deprived, because that's what they had, that's what happened to them. They thought that their milkshake wasn't enough.
Right.
It wasn't enough to bring the boys to the yard.
Right.
All right. They felt that that milkshake was lacking. And so they didn't get that satiation that this other group got drinking the same milkshake because of their beliefs.
Absolutely.
Right. So being able to point your attention in those moments to trusting and appreciating the nutrition that's in your food is going to make the effects of that food so much stronger.
Which is why when individuals actually truly pray before they eat and actually affirm that this food is going to be properly assimilated and turned into bone and muscle and beauty, they actually infuse the food with that kind of dynamic, it actually works. Yeah. Even if it's bad food, so quote unquote bad food, they still will be able to get the best out of that.
Yes.
You see, like a lot of these athletes that don't mineralize their bodies, and they're able to convert fast food so often into extraordinary Olympic feats. A lot of it is their attention and their perception. Yeah. So if you combine good perception with great nutrients,
unstoppable.
It's unstoppable.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's powerful. I love that. You said that you get the best out of it, the best possible, even if it's not the best stuff.
Right.
You know, so powerful. Now, circling back to recent discoveries with the brain.
Right.
So, you know, in my conventional university classes, one of those tenets was, you know, your brain cells they're different from the rest of the cells in your body.
Right.
But even your brain cells have stem cells.
Right.
You know, there's the possibility of brain cells becoming different things, you know, at their root. You know, might become, you know, a dendrite or a synapse.
Right.
Or, you know, this might be a structural piece, or it might be something for, you know, a neurotransmitter. There's so many different potentials that your body can make food out of.
Right.
But here's the point. We were taught that the brain cells that you got, once you reach a certain age, could be between 20 and 25, we'll just say, your brain cells, basically you stop growing new brain cells, and it's just a decline from there. Today we know that there's this phenomenon of neurogenesis, right? The creation of new brain cells. Predominantly, the vast majority of this is taking place at a specific place in the brain, the hippocampus, which is also, it's more than this, but it's known to be the memory center of the brain, right? And even as I'm saying this, because of the people that I know and what I've had the opportunity to be exposed to and to learn about, there isn't just one place in your brain that's the memory center. Right. You know, like your brain isn't just, you know, in your body. Right. You know, your brain has an extension cord, essentially, like we see this, that spreads throughout every cell in your body.
The gut everywhere.
Yeah. So even the gut, it's called the second brain. Right. In your gut, we have just about as many different types of neurotransmitters as in the brain. Right. And so it's called the enteric nervous system. That's another name for the gut. The enteric nervous system. And, you know, some scientists call it the gut brain. And even your heart. Right. And you know about this. You know about heart math.
Absolutely.
They call it the heart brain. Right. Go to Dr. Google, look it up, the heart brain, right? Your heart also is expressing these different neurotransmitters similar to your brain. Right. So when we put things in this isolation, that's what we tend to do. We find a discovery, we isolate it, right? You know, so even as I'm saying that, please know that it's coming with a caveat. But the hippocampus is where we've most identified to be the memory center of the brain, and also where we can stimulate the growth of new brain cells, which is great news. What most people don't realize, it's now inching its way into the top 5 killers in the United States is Alzheimer's disease.
That's right.
Right now it's number 6.
It's really growing.
Yeah. And people who've been exposed to this, it is a terrible, terrible disease. And the degradation is, you know, it's just very difficult to articulate. What we know today, of course, like we tend to have that identification as a society, like to lose your memory, these kind of things. But you could, you know, of course, like lose your awareness or your ability to remember how to eat or how to walk or whatever the case might be. So, but what's going on here? One of the terminologies used to describe Alzheimer's today by researchers is type 3 diabetes. right? So they're calling it type 3 diabetes because of insulin resistance taking place in the brain.
Right.
The human brain is, Michio Kaku calls it, and he's like modern day Einstein, you know, the most complicated object in the known universe, right? And you have one.
Right.
Right?
It's bigger and better than any computer.
It's incredible.
Right.
You have one, but that's a big responsibility, especially if you don't have an instruction manual. You're just like, well, I don't know what to do with this thing. I'll just, you know, put it on auto and, you know, ride it out. But understanding, you know, he said this is the most complicated object in the known universe. There's so much going on with the human brain itself, but being able to properly fuel it and to create that connectivity, it's the power's in our hands, right? So the most complicated object in the known universe, but knowing what it's made of.
Right.
And one of the foundational tenets, even we're talking about growth of the hippocampus, what are our brain cells made of? We know that it's made from food, but also primarily water.
Yes.
Right. So
and
hydration.
certain fats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So about 80% of the human brain is made of water. It's upwards of 80%, which makes it the most water dominant organ in the body next to our lungs. Now, what happens when this is right now, Rev, you know this, there's a huge market of nootropics.
Yes.
Right? Looking for how can we optimize our brain? What can I take to get, you know, improve my memory, focus, all these things? Water.
Yeah.
If you're deficient in the number one thing, which this particular study, so this was published in the journal Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise, found that just a 2% drop in your body's baseline hydration level can lead to impairment in tasks requiring attention, motor coordination, and executive function. This includes things like mental math, proofreading, you know, understanding your environment. All these things are being compromised when we're dehydrated.
Because we're 80-90% water, and then the brain has most of the water. Yeah.
So
again, what other things should people be putting in their body temple to feed the brain? Yeah. What are some of the basic things that people can begin to infuse into their temple?
Next to water, if we're talking about the dry weight of the human brain, is fat, as you just mentioned. Yeah. Right. And fat is one of those words that we have an issue with semantics. Right. Because the fat in food is not the same as fat on your body. Right. And marketers leverage that with this low fat movement and not understanding for the vast majority of the public that we need dietary fat in order to create key tissues in our bodies, including our brain cells. Right, right. And so over that process, when we hit, you know, say 25 years old, your brain is still creating brain cells, and also you need to protect the cells that you have. And when we're talking about the brain being made of fats, we're talking about structural fats. It's very different from storage fats that we think about for our bodies. Right, which it's a highly evolved system for humans to survive. Right, our fat cells are brilliant. Right, they just never experienced a culture like this society we live in today.
A fast food culture.
Our fat cells can actually expand their volume 1,000 times their size. 1,000 times their size. And but the rub is when they are expanding and consuming and holding on to that much energy, it starts to send out this distress signal. It's inflammation. Right. As we were talking about earlier with neuroinflammation. So it's creating inflammation in the body. And the body is essentially, when we talk about inflammation, it's like your body is trying to fix something. Inflammation is not a bad thing. Without inflammation, we wouldn't exist. Right, right. It's a continuous healing process. Our bodies are, even being awake is catabolic. Right. But that healing process is spurred about by inflammation. It's calling in resources, right? And so with this false distress signal going off with these fat cells, it's creating this kind of chronic state of inflammation. And it's really affecting our brains. And so to go back to what is the brain made of? So these structural fats, these are going to be made primarily of omega-3 fatty acids. Okay. Okay. Omega-3 fatty acids. So it's not just all fats are not just rolling up into the brain. Right. Okay? Right. So for years, even in that nutritional science class, saturated fat was terrible. It's the worst thing you could ever, you know, you shouldn't even speak it. It's dirty language in the class, right? But here's the crazy thing. Human breast milk is 20, 30, 40% saturated fat. Right from the mama. Right. Here's the thing, Rev.
It's feeding the brain.
This is another place I've come to in my career. we don't know what the best human food is. Everything has been an experiment.
Right.
The one thing we know for certain is human food is breast milk.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Everything else has been
Well,
experiment.
it feeds the brain.
We've had some great experiments. We've found some things over the years. But being that much saturated fat, that percentage of saturated fat, and to say that it's bad it is so dangerous, right? Now, here's the thing. As you get older, those gates, because we have the blood-brain barrier that's allowing certain nutrients to get into the brain has two protective mechanisms, primarily security systems. It's the only organ fully encased in hard bone, right? So we have the cranium. It's that, because again, most complicated object in the known universe, our biology didn't come to the party without some protection, right? So we got the built-in helmet, but internally we have the blood-brain barrier. And it has certain toll booths, little gates that allow in very specific nutrients. The rest of the body has kind of its own diet, even certain organs, of course, we know this, but the brain has an exclusive diet. We call it neuronutrition.
Right.
The gates that allow in saturated fat diminish greatly as you get older, right? So we can't just be like, you need saturated fat for the brain. And I'm saying this not to say that this can't be false, but I'm saying this from the perspective of science, what we have now, by actually looking at the brain,
Right.
the researchers who are in the lab looking at how nutrition specifically affects the makeup of the brain.
Right.
So saturated fat is just one of those things where it's not to say that it's bad right now, okay? And the sourcing, that's the problem with saturated fat and the dogma around it, because the saturated fat in an avocado is very different.
I was going to ask you about the avocado.
In a fried Snicker.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I was going to ask you about that because I had a friend of mine who I was telling him to put an avocado in his smoothie. And he said, no, my doctor said that it has too much fat and I shouldn't eat avocados. And I won't say his name. I was saying, doctor, no. I don't think your doctor's correct on that, man. I've been eating avocados all my life. It's a different kind of fat, exactly what you're saying regarding the avocado. So all fats aren't equal, is what you're telling us.
Absolutely.
And the source is important as to where they come from.
So just on that note with avocados and the saturated fat content, which again, it can create this unnecessary fear in, here's what the peer-reviewed data shows. I'm just going to share a couple of studies with you. So number one, this was published in the journal Frontiers in Endocrinology, revealed that there's dramatic changes in blood sugar, because when we're thinking about the heart, we just we have this cognitive association with blood pressure.
Right.
But it's the same blood sugar
is
one of the biggest determinants of whether or not you're going to have hypertension, cardiovascular disease, the whole thing. So it's the same blood. They found that there's dramatic changes in blood sugar, shifting from high blood sugar spike to an impending crash can increase anxiety and trigger hyperactivity in the emotional centers of the brain. So now we've got issues with cardiovascular, diabetes, and cognitive. And they found, and this is in the journal Nutrients and Molecular Nutrition and Food Research, found that avocados can increase insulin sensitivity and directly improve your blood sugar levels. All right? So
that's what I was trying to tell my boy, but I didn't have all of that scientific language. Yeah. But I absolutely.
Yeah. And again, you just know this experientially.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I eat avocado every day in my smoothie.
Yeah. I love it. It's one of my favorites. It's on the cover. Look at that.
Look at that. Oh, yeah. Eat smarter. You got an avocado with a light bulb coming out of it.
One of the studies that I shared in Eat Smarter found that, the brain itself will gladly confiscate upwards of 50% of the glucose from any meal you consume. All right? So if you're bringing in a lot of sugar, your brain is sopping up half of it. Again, driving up those rates of insulin resistance taking place in the brain. Right? Again, tying back to Alzheimer's disease.
That's what I was going to say, tying back to that.
So it's because of that exposure. The brain is never, even though it does what it does, it's never been exposed to this level of sugar before. Right? So helping
because sugar's in everything. It's in your Lucky Charms. It's in your bread. It's in so many ingredients. And people don't even know that they're eating so much sugar. Yeah.
It's crazy. If you think about, and the biggest culprit is liquid sugar, right?
Well, like sodas, things like that.
20-ounce bottle of Coca-Cola, you're getting 16 teaspoons of sugar. 16 teaspoons.
So any mother would not feed their kids 16 teaspoons of sugar.
Right.
So giving them a Coke, that's what they're doing.
Yeah, but now I wasn't a big fan of soda growing up. I was about the juices, right? But not juices. We didn't have just
juice box.
Orange juice. We would have orange drink.
Right.
0% juice, but just has those flavor sensations, right? But a 20-ounce glass of pasteurized orange juice is 14 teaspoons. You know, again, but we think we're doing a better decision. And of course, not to negate that we probably got some minerals here, whatever. But if we're talking about the impact of sugar, it is incredibly abnormal to consume that much sugar. You are definitely going to be invoking a distorted response from your hormones, from insulin, glucagon, cortisol, the list goes on, thyroid hormone. All of these things are going to become dysfunctional when you bring that much amount of sugar in at one time.
Right. Wow. As we're coming to a close here, first of all, I want people to know about Eat Smarter, Shawn Stevenson. This is a very powerful, I would say it's a national bestseller, but it's a powerful handbook. And I know you have some more books coming out, and we've covered so much material that I'm going to have you come back, because we barely scratched the surface of some of the things you wanted to talk about. But what would you want to leave the people with in terms of not only the psychology of the food, but what's the basic things that people should be putting in their body? I know you talked about fat for the brain.
Yeah.
Certain things for the heart.
Yeah, we'll start with those
Water.
two things. Number one, hydration. It's so simple, but we tend to overlook it.
Right.
And unfortunately, we have these cookie cutter recommendations as well. You know, there are some people on the extreme, and I just had a friend of mine who's a brilliant guy in the fitness domain, recommended people drink a gallon of water a day. And he has his reasons behind it. And he's
depending
smart
on
in
the
certain
size of your
things.
body.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
You can't tell a 5-foot person who's 100 pounds to drink a gallon of water today. That's not going to be ideal versus Shaquille O'Neal.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, we've got to pay attention to your unique needs.
Right.
That's where the work comes.
Right.
The number one signal for how much water you need to drink is listening to your body. That's the best. But I know that we got a lot going on. We can be distracted, that whole thing. So what is a better recommendation? You take your body weight, you divide that number in half. So just say you weigh 180 pounds, divide in half, that's 90. 90 ounces is going to be your target.
For 24 hours or 12 hours?
Per day. Now, again, it's going to be based on your lifestyle too. You know, maybe you're training for something, maybe you're sweating more, maybe you're out in the sun, you know, maybe you're just kind of laying around not doing much. But that just gives you a baseline to start at. I've been talking about this for, again, almost 20 years. And the practice that I have every day, I did it on this day, you know, for 17 years. And now I'm not really on TikTok like that, but there was a challenge going around and people were sending it to me because, you know, sometimes you can put something into culture and it just takes on a life of its own.
Right.
But I've been talking about this inner bath. For, you know, I've been doing it for 17 years. And a couple of my friends who got, you know, big New York Times best-selling books and the whole thing, they've referenced this idea that I share with them. But every morning, the first thing that I do, you know, when I get up in the morning, well, you know, being under your tutelage, you know, the first thing that I do is just kind of going through that process right now is, you know, I set an intention, you know, and I give thanks for the opportunity to go into this day. But the first thing that I do is I ask, how can I serve today?
Yes.
Right. And so I do that, then I go pee. Right? Then I go pee, then I drink water. You know, I do my inner bath. And so this is what I'm going to recommend people to do is start your day with an inner bath because the day can get away from you.
Yeah.
And what that means is, number one, when you wake up in the morning, or whenever you're waking up, this is one of the states that you're the most dehydrated.
Yeah.
You've likely gone 7-8 hours without any hydration, and your body has undergone trillions of processes, and there's a lot of metabolic waste. This is why the urine tends to be more concentrated, of course, but to help to flush out these metabolic waste products. Because one of the things I also talk about in the book is the reabsorption of things if they're not removed from the system. Same thing with whether it's hormones, whether it's, you know, even lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat, it can get reabsorbed.
Right.
We actually need to burn the fat, beta oxidation, cellular respiration. And one of the studies that I shared was, again, it's a peer-reviewed study published in a major journal, found that drinking 17 ounces just within a couple of minutes of water led to something called water-induced thermogenesis, where the test subjects' metabolic rate increased about 30%. So they're burning more calories simply by drinking a calorie-free water.
Wow.
And that response happened, we'll say 30 to an hour later. Like it has this kind of lasting effect. This doesn't mean to go guzzling, keep drinking all this water, try to lose weight, because we might think, okay, how is that possible? Is the body is because you got to warm up the water? That's superficial. It's because the water makes everything work better. But then we don't want to get into a place of diminishing returns where we're just like haphazardly flushing out minerals.
Flushing out your minerals and everything else.
So keep this in balance, use this to your advantage. So what I recommend
That's what I do when I wake up too.
Yeah.
I have a glass of water with minerals and lemon.
Yeah.
It's the first thing I drink.
Yes. Same here. Same here. So what amount? I'd say ideally that study was 17 ounces. So 15 to 30 ounces to start the day. I'm usually right around probably 25 ounces
I got to add a little bit more to mine then.
But just to get that metabolic effect and also to help to flush the system out, the metabolic waste. And again, this isn't just some airy-fairy thing. This is real. Like you literally have metabolic waste accumulated. Drinking water helps to remove that stuff. That's another thing, just to tie back to Alzheimer's. One of the things seen is an inability of the brain to clean itself. Right? So the glial cells, so it's the lymphatic system in the brain, it's 10 times more active when you're sleeping. It's another one of those risk factors for Alzheimer's is sleep deprivation, right?
And you have that book, Sleep Smarter.
Yeah.
Another bestseller.
Again, and I didn't write these books because I just felt compelled to do it. I did it because I knew that this was missing from the conversation. And it's so important for people to have this information, right? In a way that makes, because sleep, here's the thing too, Rev, is not necessarily a sexy topic, Food is something food is sexy. It's sexy, it's food fun, it's complex, but sleep is just like, we don't even know what it is. It's so weird. It's a very weird thing. Now, people that love their sleep, it is romantic, but what I did was I took the peer-reviewed data and just brought it to life, made it fun and sexy and applicable, easy to apply things and to get results.
Outstanding.
So
this has been great, man.
Thank you. Oh, you can't let me go. I didn't even give anything for the fat. For the brain.
For the brain.
So last thing, I'll share one more thing with everybody. For the fats, for those structural fats, omega-3 fatty acids.
Omega-3, that's necessary.
Every person today, if you're going to take one action on like, what should I get besides superfood greens from Rev, right? Besides getting that, is getting yourself an omega-3 supplement. And so I take
that every day.
One of the things that was most alarming for me in doing the research for this book was coming across some data on, and they used fMRIs. So they were looking at the brain to see this test subject's intake of omega-3s and what that did with the degradation of their brains. And they found that the test subjects who had the lowest intake of omega-3s had the highest rate of brain shrinkage. Okay? And so it's 4 grams is that target baseline that you want to hit. And so omega-3s, most popular, and in these studies as well, 99% of the studies are done on fish oil. Now, there's a range here because food first, all right? So in the journal Neurology, they found that people who ate 1 seafood meal per week did, in fact, perform better on cognitive skills tests, had the healthiest brains.
Because of the omega-3s.
Yes. So the omega-3s, so food first, seafood.
But that salmon has to be the one, it can't be farm-fed salmon. It has to be wild salmon.
There's levels to it.
There's levels to it.
And also you have to include, because this is what you do as well.
I mean, I take a vegan omega-3
so
that's been very
if people
powerful.
are doing a vegetarian protocol, vegan protocol, we're inclusive here. With the Rev, with the Agape. So for the food, we've got, neuroscientist, Dr. Lisa Mosconi shared with me, again, she's a neuroscientist, but also a nutrition expert. Looking at the brain, she shared that the highest source of food-based omega-3s in nature is actually coming from fish eggs. So caviar,
I was going to say
salmon roe, right? So it's just like, why is that so expensive? I get it. Okay, I understand. So we've got that. We've got, eggs, that kind of stuff. But then if we're doing more of a vegetarian protocol, and depending on where our beliefs lie, we might look at krill oil, which is a microscopic, keyword microscopic, shrimp, all right? And there's also rich in astaxanthin. You'll notice that it's red. These tablets are red.
I have that.
Which is very protective of the omega-3s. But if we're not doing that, what I was doing in my practice, Rev, and this is one of the biggest mistakes that I made, was I was recommending people for their omega-3 needs. I understood how important it was, but I was telling people, get your chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, all that stuff. Those are wonderful in their own rights, but the omega-3s are not the same as what the brain uses.
Yeah.
That's ALA. Those are more used for cellular processes, energy, whatever, but it's
Plus
not.
they can produce high level estrogen if you eat too much of those.
So this is the thing. It's not used for structural fats in the brain.
Right.
Your brain is not using ALA to make your brain cells
Let me just say this.
structured.
Shawn is bringing a lot of information here, and he's giving you a lot of very detailed analysis of this. You should get his book so that you can really get down with what he's saying.
Let's go. And so just to put the period on this statement, we can convert some of that plant-based omega-3 into DHA and EPA, which is what we need. Those are the ones used for the structural fats of the brain.
Right.
We can convert some, but we can lose upwards of 90% in that conversion process. You have to eat a lot of chia seeds to meet your needs.
Yeah.
So with that said, what you do is get yourself a vegan omega-3 supplement, which is going to be an algae oil. Right?
That's what I take.
It's a concentration.
You recommended it.
Yes.
That's what I take.
If anything, again, today, stack conditions in your favor. You need, I'm saying to do this because it's so important for the structural integrity of your brain. If you're not getting in your DHA and EPA, you're losing brain volume, and it's dangerous, and you don't have to do that.
Absolutely.
So if you're taking on a vegan protocol, get yourself an algae oil. For other folks, food first, ideally. Fish sources are great, eggs. We got the krill oil we mentioned. That's a lot for today,
That's
Rev.
a lot, man. We've covered a lot, Brother Shawn.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, man.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
#1 model health show, #1 in the United States. I'm glad that you are my first guest.
Let's go. Me too. Such an honor.
So listen, we just had a beautiful conversation with the individual that created the model health show, Shawn Stevenson. And he gave us so much rich, in-depth understanding of what's necessary for the body temple to shine and to glow. Now, we're talking about taking back our mind. Now, what happens is when we're able to apply what he's saying, the body temple becomes a fifth instrument to catch more of the cosmic energy that needs to be assimilated through the body temple so we can do the work that we're appointed to do as we've arrived on earth as a spiritual being having a human incarnation. The human incarnation, we have a body temple. We have a mental body. We have an emotional body. But if those particular bodies are not congruent with our soul, or we're not able to carry that kind of energy, we don't get to do the work that we're appointed to do. So health, as he talked about, and fitness, and vitality, and vigor, and regeneration, and neurogenesis, all of that has something to do with our intention, has something to do with the hydration, has something to do with the real fats that we put into the body temple. All of that works together to take back our mind, to do the work that we're appointed to do. We want you to be healthy. We want you to be fit because you have a right and a reason to be here on the planet, this time in human history and beyond.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
That awakening process typically happens when people reach their lowest denominator. They hit rock bottom because then they can see themselves through the eyes of somebody else. You feel so altered, you're not returning any text. That's when you start observing yourself. I mean, you can learn and change in pain and suffering, or you can learn and change in joy and inspiration.